Welcome back to yet another episode of Chatting with Chat. Today I'm joined by Roy Rosin, who has spent his career working with ideas when they're still unfinished, unproven, and full of possibility. In fact, we met Roy, geez, probably right when I had started the company, and he's been instrumental in trying to get us connected to the right people. Before being at Penn, where I had met him, he helped scale Quicken at Intuit, becoming their first innovation leader, and later brought the same builder's mindset into healthcare as the chief innovation officer at Penn Medicine. Today, he serves as a board partner at First Round Capital, where he works with founders at the earliest stages, helping them think through what is worth building, what is worth testing, and what has the potential to become something much bigger. Roy, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to get into how ideas take shape and what it really takes to help them grow.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's good to see you, Chad.
Yeah, you as well. Awesome. So why don't we dive right in? So at Intuit, you helped build a culture where teams could test, learn, and move quickly. What did that experience teach you about how to experiment with ideas without losing sight of the problem you're actually trying to solve?
We used to say that we want to fall in love with the problem and not with the solution.
Mm,
Sometimes experimentation can be sort of this, oh, try all these different directions, and you start thinking about solutions, then you really focus more on the solution than the
yeah.
problem. But in this world of like falling in love with the problem, not the solution, it sort of it changes that because when you're even structuring experiments, you are doing it in the form of a hypothesis, right? You have a very specific scientific method hypothesis where you have a belief and you're making a prediction and you're defining a needle that must move, right? So
Mhm.
in a healthcare perspective, the problem might be length of stay, or it might be infection rate, or it might be a mortality rate. And it's pretty easy to get clear on that problem. And then even if you're diverging, you're trying a bunch of different solutions, you have defined the hypothesis as if I do these things this way, I think that needle will move this much, right? And so it kind of keeps it visible the entire way through. I think it's interesting also, when I think about some of the things we got wrong in some of the early days, at Intuit, and frankly in the software industry, there was this really bad model, right? I mean, there was a business model that was sort of a upgrade model. So
Mhm.
you needed to create new features, to
Yeah.
get someone to buy the next version. I buy version 7, version 8, version 9, version 10 of Quicken. And the focus almost became on creating enough new stuff that
Right.
they would upgrade and buy the next version. And that's sort of a destructive model, right? Because that is not I'm going to improve the outcome. I'm going to change something that matters to the customer. I am going to make sure they're saving more money or they're avoiding more overdraft fees or whatever it happens to be. And sometimes those things are nuanced, right?
Yeah.
I remember stories with families where they said, I just want to argue with my spouse less about money, right? That's a needle, right? It's
Yeah.
a needle that you could focus on. So I think that old business model, which thankfully is gone, you know, taught us when we look back on it, it's like, wow, that was just the wrong way to think about software and software development. Like building for the sake of building something new, as opposed to like it only matters if it changes the world in a meaningful way. So I think that way of thinking is what has evolved really the most. And of course, what complements it is when you are doing it the right way and getting deeply embedded, right? You're getting in the space of the people you're trying to help. It's very hard to go off on these strange tangents of what you wanted to build because, like, if you're working on point of sale and you're working the cash register in a candy shop, or you are trying to change a women's health metric and you are embedded in the OBGYN group, um, it's hard to lose sight of what you're really trying to change. The
Yeah.
needle is very well defined. I mean, look, how many times does a woman have a stroke? I want to
Right.
reduce the number of strokes. How many times does that patient give birth and then end up back in the hospital? I want to reduce that readmission. And so all the experimentation that you do never loses sight of the thing that you're trying to change is readmissions or morbidity, right? Those things are very, very clear.
I love that. So I think one of the unique aspects of your background is just how you've helped bring new ideas into large organizations. And oftentimes, a strong idea can affect someone's day-to-day work. So, to your point, for example, when they started changing from let's just create an upgrade to more of a subscription model and thinking about what's the problem, what have you seen leaders do well? When they need to build the trust and bring people into the process.
Yeah, innovation is easier than scaling innovation, right? I mean, scaling
Hmm.
organizationally, operationally is the win. Everyone knows that what you're trying to do is change at scale in a material way. So you certainly don't want to get caught in sort of this, pilot purgatory or just, cool early things that don't ever make a difference at an institutional or organizational level. The foundation of it again is sort of some of the same things. I mean, it's a little bit trite to say you have to be really, really good at listening, but you do. Like
Yeah,
first you need to identify who are the people who are affected by the decision. That's harder than it sounds. You hear people throw around terms like stakeholder management all the time, but when you dig into it and you say, well, who gets made better off and who gets made worse off, right?
right.
Every change, even if it's a great change, a super positive change, makes somebody worse off usually, right?
Yeah,
I sometimes use climate change as an example here, not to make this a political podcast, but
yeah,
let's just say that you really are worried about climate change and you think we should move away from coal, right? You may be very against coal and poisoning the air, but you probably have nothing against coal miners. You
right.
probably think coal miners are good people and you don't want to hurt them, right? But they
Yeah,
might be made worse off if there's no more coal, right?
right,
And so like this process of saying who can block, who can enable, who would have to include it in the budget the next year, and specifically working with the people who might be made worse off is really, really critical. Again, getting embedded is part of the solution. Like I need to understand what are the things that would ruin their day? What are the things that would get them fired?
right,
What are the things that keep them up at night? And so I think that understanding of the perspectives you may not have when you're coming into it, right? From that kind of more full 360 is really critical. But I don't know, the way you ask the question is interesting, right? Like trust I still think of trust as like sort of built on relationships
yeah,
and thinking about building that relationship in a very human way. It's
hmm,
like showing up,
yeah,
and if you're listening and you're understanding and you're demonstrating that understanding through action, right? You're committing to things and you're following through on those things and you consistently do the things you say you're going to do. You're going to build trust over time. And if they expressed a concern to you, you're not just, writing in a notebook and saying, "Hey, thanks, that's great," and then do whatever you're going to do anyway.
right,
It wasn't that you asked and listened, it's that you respond and you close that loop and say, here are the trade-offs you're making. Here's what I'm thinking about. How would this do? Like, would this address that concern? Right. And, it may be that you can address the concerns, right? And maybe you actually have to do something that does make someone better off. And then you're in a really interesting spot of saying, well, I understand the implications and the consequence of this decision. What are we going to do about it? Like, how am I
right.
going to make you whole, right?
Yeah,
Or what are the ways that we can still make this good? If it's good for the organization, but it's bad for you,
right.
what can we do about that? And it's being
Yeah.
very intentional about those things. So I think that, building trust is a process that doesn't happen, instantly. Trust develops over time. It's usually driven through relationships and it's driven through consistently doing what you say you're going to do.
When you think about that, I guess, cross communication and something that you do might not be better, it might be worse, et cetera. Kind of bringing it back to healthcare. Obviously, healthcare is full of workarounds, right? For both patients and clinicians. I think 99% of the solutions out there, both sides would say, I wish it was better.
Yeah.
Um, how do you decide whether a workaround is just something like a temporary fix or a sign that something actually does need to be redesigned?
Yeah. That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that one before, Chad. I mean,
Yeah,
I love workarounds, right? Because workarounds are clues,
yeah,
right? And you see a workaround is somebody trying to solve something. And, one of the core tenets of real good innovation, like high impact innovation, where you create value and you capture that value, is sort of this conversion from what I'd call stated behavior, where someone says something is important, to observable behavior, where somebody's actually lifting a finger and trying to do something about it, right?
Right.
Not just saying, "Oh yeah, I'll buy that," or "Oh yeah, yeah, I'll use that new product," but like they are looking around, asking around, doing Google searches, spending time looking for, new and better solutions. So, workarounds are fascinating, and studying workarounds is an art. A silly example, so people who are watching or listening even think about workarounds. Like if you're in a quite a few bathrooms, like typical bathrooms, right? And you're leaving the bathroom, sometimes you'll see like a pile of crumpled up paper towels, by
Yep.
the door as you
Yep.
exit. And like, what is that? Well, that's a workaround. But what they're doing is they just wash their hands after using the bathroom, and they don't want to touch the door handle.
Right.
So they're taking a paper towel and they're using that, and then they have no place to put it, so
Yep.
they're dropping it, right? And so, simple solution, maybe you should put a wastebasket there so they don't have a pile of paper towels on
Right.
the floor. And if you kind of extend that line of thought of like, oh, that's an artifact, or that's like that is a clue that there's something you should probably act on. I know I remember a long time ago going into like bathrooms of geriatric patients when we were studying something like medication adherence,
Yeah.
and you'll see, you'll see a magnifying glass, right? And like, what's the workaround? Well, like they can't read any of the medication labels, right?
Ah,
Right? The text on the label is too small for someone
right.
with 75-year-old eyes to even see it. Like, so that's a workaround. And what if they didn't have a magnifying glass? That's a bit of a problem. Maybe you should
Yeah.
make a legible, readable medication label. And what you're doing is you're kind of like thinking about what is the cost of the change relative to the benefit of the change. Yeah,
Right.
I think the way you asked is temporary fix or sign that you should actually design and implement, a new solution. That's kind of the thinking. It's like, well, what is almost the business case of changing it? I mean, there's no
Yeah.
cost really to putting a trash can by the door so you don't have a pile of paper towels.
Right.
But the ones you're talking about are much, much bigger and more serious when
Totally.
talking about, healthcare. And there it's kind of like, okay, well, what can you build and what would the benefit of that be? The lower cost, the higher revenue, the change in health outcomes. And you are literally looking at that kind of cost versus benefit. Because sometimes workarounds are good enough, right? The
Right.
workarounds that people have designed to their own are good enough. But those things that people have designed on their own are fascinating, right? Like there's a whole area of study of positive deviance, right? And you go back
Mhm.
to Vietnam in the early 90s, where most of the children under 5 years old were starving. They were severely malnourished, and in this case, like the workarounds that, even though most children were in real trouble, the outliers were doing well because they had developed workarounds, right? They were foraging, which was in eating things that were not even deemed appropriate for children, right?
Yeah.
They were doing things that were culturally strange, like, feeding the child past the point of them
Right.
saying, I'm done eating. And these kind of outlier behaviors were workarounds for a very, very serious problem that was affecting a whole population. Studying those workarounds revealed solutions that actually reduced severe malnutrition by 85% across the entire
Oh,
country, right?
yeah.
So workarounds and studying the workaround as the solution in sort of this positive deviance situation is something that I find really fun and really interesting. And at other times, it simply leads you to understanding the problem. I think there's a really famous one, not that unlike the case of the magnifying glass in the
Mhm.
bathroom. And if I remember correctly, it goes back a while, but I think it was Procter and Gamble when they were, they before Intuit got into this mode of going into people's homes and into their offices, these follow me homes where you're
Yeah.
literally embedded in the space. Procter and Gamble used to do that, and they would go and look at, for example, the laundry room and hang out in the laundry room, and they would see like steak knives, in the laundry room. It's like, what is that steak knife doing there? And when they ask people about their packaging up to that point, if you think of Tide as a laundry detergent,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
people are like, oh, it's great, it's fine, no problem. But then you'd go into the home and you'd see usually the women were the ones who were doing at that time at least the laundry. Everyone had broken nails and there are these steak knives. And what's going on? Where they're like, I don't, do you remember those cardboard boxes that Tide used to come in?
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were, they were like stabbing them with steak knives
Right.
to try to open those things. And, the workaround was a clue, right?
Right.
That you could design different packaging.
Yeah. No, and I think it's really fascinating when you think about worker. I mean, you brought up a really important aspect, especially in healthcare, is the cost benefit analysis. And I know, for example, like when we launched our patient gown, we saw the value of a much better gown. And so we were pricing it higher in the early days.
Yeah.
And you were actually one of the first that was like, hey, we have negative cash. We're never going to be able to do something better, even if it is better in the long term.
Mhm.
And so then worked with the factories to be able to get the pricing to be the same or less than what they were paying today, so that
Yeah.
way the cost benefit analysis was okay, the cost is the same or less, and it's a better product. Like, why wouldn't we do this?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's been pretty monumental for us.
And honestly, one of the things I've been saying a lot lately is
Yeah,
better loses, right? Better always loses. I remember Scott Cook, who's the founder of Intuit, taught me that early on.
yeah,
I hadn't thought about friction and switching costs and things like that. And like
right,
being better isn't good enough. You have to be better by a lot. We used
totally.
to say order of magnitude, right? If you want people to switch from whatever their existing behavior pattern of consumption is, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there is a hurdle that you have to think about around behavior change where like a little bit better loses, a lot better can win.
Totally. Fast forward to present day. You're at first round capital. You're seeing companies pretty early on, when the story is oftentimes still forming. How can you tell when a founder deeply understands the problem and the customer that they're building for?
Yeah, I mean that's the art, and I'm really lucky that I have partners who are really good at that.
Yeah,
I think the first round partners are about as good as anyone I've ever seen at distinguishing, which is why they have the track record
yeah,
they do. The reason I'm saying they and not we, is it's really the partners who've built this, before I showed up.
yeah,
So I want to give credit where it's due. I think that I've been fascinated by the depth with which they do diligence, not just reference checking, but understanding the stories of the people who are coming through. You're seeing
yeah,
all incredible people. You're only funding a tiny, tiny percentage of them. So I mean, it's really an interesting filter that's going on here. When I think about some of the entrepreneurs and founders, they really are like remarkable and they're remarkably deep. Like the depth of their understanding of these problems is extraordinary. And they do the old Intuit thing of getting deeply embedded, like living it.
yeah,
I mean, I can maybe stories are the best way to answer this question. Like I'm thinking about Assort is one of our companies that's been a real high flyer in this world of automating scheduling and communications and all touch points between the practice and the patients. And, John and Jeff were the founders there, luckily found a couple of practices that were willing to work with them in the early days, and they sat there shoulder to shoulder, right? They could tell you every reason why something didn't work out of the gate. They could tell you about these binders that people have on the desk with all the thousands of rules that are not in the training set of any LLM. It's not like you
right.
can use OpenAI or, Claude to automate this stuff. Like you literally have to extract exactly what should happen in this situation. What are all these edge cases, like millions of edge cases?
Yeah,
How do I handle this? What do I do in terms of this clinical escalation triage? What do you do in terms of that provider's preferences? What do you do in terms of location and language and behavior and time of day? So there's all these things that they understood by just sitting there, right?
right.
Um, and trying again and again and again until they got it right. Um, I think Assured is a similar one. Rahul and Varun are the founders of a company called Assured, which is automated credentialing and plan enrollment. And
Mm,
it's a fascinating, it's a dense space, right? Like we
right.
also, version one, like generation one was like outsourced to
Yeah,
people who do your credentialing. Generation two was, the medallions and certifies and verifiables of like, we'll automate some of that outsourcing. And then Assured was sort of like the first version three of I'm going to just automate everything end to end.
yeah,
Well, how do they have like the depth of insight? They had run a practice. They had actually run a company. They were founders of a digital health company
yeah,
earlier. And credentialing was their problem. In fact, I've seen credentialing be the thing that prevents a lot of digital health companies from growing. I can't get my providers in network fast enough across
right.
states fast enough across all the payers fast enough. and these guys had lived it. They
Right.
lived as business owners. And when they automated those problems away, they understood things that were like difficult and ugly and messy, right? Like
Yeah.
if you just use the published rules of the payer, you're going to get denied because the things they have on their website might be wrong.
Right.
Like they knew how to get to truth in a way that was just absolutely brilliant. And the full round trip, it wasn't just the credentialing, it was also the plan enrollment. People were focused on just automating one piece of it when they realized that that was insufficient because they lived it
Hmm.
as a practice owner. So across all these companies, M7 is a nursing, phenomenal nursing.
Alana's great.
She was a nurse, right? She
Yeah.
was working at MSK, and
Yep.
she saw something that everyone could have seen. In fact, she saw two things that everyone could have seen, right? I mean,
Right.
number one is that fairness and favoritism is an issue everywhere, yet nobody did anything about it.
Yep.
For two, yet all these nurses were like, the schedules were so rigid that if I had to relieve a babysitter at 4 p.m., I couldn't take that schedule, which meant you're getting into contract labor and overtime labor. She just dropped $20 million to the bottom line, of a customer by making sure that they're using their existing labor force, right?
Yeah.
Without
That's
Indian labor,
crazy.
right? She was a nurse. She lived this stuff,
Yeah.
right? So it's a really wonderful sort of depth of insight, but it's also not just the insight, like what do you do with it? There's a lot of people with insights, right? I mean, you know this as an entrepreneur, like it's who acts on them,
Right.
right?
100%.
And who will just continue to iterate on them until they get it right. Because usually the first idea of how do you address that problem that you've lived with or seen is often
Yeah.
not the right idea, right? It doesn't work the way you imagine.
I think one of the most important things you've highlighted across all of your examples is not only living it and breathing it, but being side by side with those that are.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we take super seriously because, like for us, we have our expert design council with our customers where we have everyone from the customer able to come in and provide their feedback and their thoughts. Because what I tell everyone is, look, if Google could have beta in their logo for 15 years on Gmail for hundreds of millions of people, then we should always be thinking the same way and always be looking to improve and iterate. And the
Yeah.
only way you do that is with the people that are on the front lines dealing with that each and every day.
These founders have this day one mentality, right? They are always trying to prove themselves. They're always trying to get
Yeah,
better. And now, the competition can move faster too. So like
right.
there's this executional need to get better faster than anyone else,
Yeah,
right? And so I think that proximity, that intimacy that you mentioned that I talk about a lot is certainly part of it. And, how you orchestrate your technology, your company for speed
yeah,
is critical. I mean, velocity wins.
for sure. All right, now we're in the rapid fire part where I'll just ask very quick questions, very quick answers. Um, what is one habit that you wish you had picked up earlier?
Um, I would say as a manager, it took me a while to learn that the right way to do something isn't necessarily my way.
Mm,
So getting better at defining the outcome that I need to see, not necessarily the method of how to get there.
love that. What's one question that you wish more founders ask themselves?
In the healthcare world, uh, it's can I capture the value that I create, right?
Mm, yeah,
Right. There are things you can do that are phenomenally useful, but there's no economic
right.
value.
Love that. And then finally, what's one app that you use more than you'd like to admit?
Now, yeah, I don't know if it's more than I'd like to admit, but one of our new companies is called Town, which is a
Hmm.
phenomenal agentic assistant. And maybe the part I don't want to admit is how much of my work Town does for me. Like the reports I'm supposed to generate on companies and updates and things, which I was pretty inconsistent at. My partners want to know what's going on at these companies, and I'm not really doing always, filing the reports or doing the work that I should do to share the information they want.
Right.
I don't do any of it anymore. Town does it all for me.
I
So
love that. That's efficiency to the max.
yeah, yeah, that's great.
Um,
It's wonderful.
well, Roy, this has been really incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. You're always one of the most gracious and smartest people I've known since I started the company, and always love getting the chance to chat with you.
I appreciate that.